I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. We're going to begin tonight with a sort of a sickening story about a murder in Portland that should have never happened. Now, of course, you can say that about any murder, but this one is special. It involves repeated domestic violence, and it had the system, prosecutors and judges, trying to keep the alleged killer in jail. And then a Portland group, which is against people being held on bail, paid to set him free. And 7 days later, this past Saturday, he's accused of killing his victim. The case involves the murder of a woman named Rachel Abraham. She was 36 years old. I went to her home today in southeast Portland. She lived here with 4 children, according to court documents. The neighborhood is a series of townhouses squeezed close together. Her ex and the father of 2 of her kids, 33-year-old Mohamed Osman Adan, is charged with her murder. Neighbors, as you might imagine, are heartbroken.
It's bad.
This is very bad.
Very, very bad. I was not even thinking someone in our complex was thinking or doing this type of stuff. And when the police told me that he has been arrested, has been released, he has been in the monitoring, we don't know all of that thing going on. But anyway, we lost very, very good neighbor.
Yeah, heard that from a lot of folks. We're going to spend a few moments, extra moments, digging deeper into this because there's some things that you should know about. According to court documents, Adan had been arrested earlier this year for domestic violence. Rachel Abraham told police on May 2nd, Adan had punched her in the head 2 times while she was laying on the couch in the living room. She told police that Adan became enraged because he found a text from a female friend on her phone. She filed a restraining order against him then, and it did very little to help her. On June 23rd, police were back at the home because of a restraining order violation and another assault. This time, she told police, Adan had picked arguments with her in front of the children and broke her phone, preventing her from calling for help. Adan further blocked her path numerous times to prevent her from leaving the home. And it got worse. Adan would hold her down. He placed her in a chokehold by pressing down on her windpipe. Abraham stated that due to this, it was painful to swallow and hard to breathe. Abraham said she had been foaming at the mouth and believed she was going to pass out. He did this a total of 5 times throughout the night. Now, I know this is disturbing to hear. It's disturbing to read, but I do think it's important. This was all right out there in the open in public documents for anyone who cared enough to read them, anyone who might think about bailing him out, for example. There's one more bit from the court record about that awful night in June. There was one point during the entire altercation where Adan drug Abraham to the ground and said, "I'm going to put you to sleep," while kneeling on her throat. Adan told her, "I should kill you." The prosecutors warned the court that Adan was a serious threat, writing at the bottom of that court document I've been referring to that offender controls most or all of the victim's daily activities. Victim believes the offender is capable of killing her, repeated violations of the restraining order and/or court orders, and offender follows and spies on the victim. Eventually, despite all of that, Adan was able to get out of jail. But on July 26th, he was arrested again, this time for cutting off his GPS monitor and going back into the home of Rachel Abraham. Then on August 19th, a release hearing was held. Prosecutors argued that Adan was dangerous and should not be released and asked for a high bail to keep him in jail. The judge heard arguments from both sides, thought about it, and then agreed with the prosecutors, setting the bail at $20,000, which with bail reform, I'm told, is considered a high amount these days. The very next day, August 20th, a woman in Portland with the Portland Freedom Fund posted the 10% bail that was required, $2,000. I went to her home in southeast Portland today to ask what sort of background checks she'd done on Adan, how much she'd learned about his previous arrest and those court documents that I've been sharing with you. No one came to the door. She also did not return my phone call. And by now, you know what happened next. 7 days after being bailed out by the Portland Freedom Fund, which is no doubt is a well-meaning group trying to help people in jail, 7 days later, Rachel Abraham was dead. Police said neighbors called 911 August 20th after hearing a fight between a man and a woman. Shortly after that, Adan was on the phone with emergency operators, telling them that Abraham was dead. He claimed he had taken a knife from her and was protecting the children in the home. Police found her dead on a bed upstairs. The court documents describe in gruesome detail the many injuries Abraham received. I'm not going to horrify you with that. The case is so outrageous, though, that the district attorney today issued a rare statement condemning the group, Portland Freedom Fund. It reads in part, Mr. Adan's intent to kill the victim was unambiguous. After the judge set Adan's bail, the Portland Freedom Fund undermined our efforts and the efforts of the court to save the victim's life by using their resources to bail him out. Finally, the Freedom Fund issued its own statement. In Mr. Adan's specific case, the court had deemed him eligible for bail release, and he was referred to us as a financial provider for 2 small children with a letter of community support. Along with support he was receiving from the community, we were in contact with Mr. Adan throughout the time between his release and rearrest and did not receive any indications for concern. Here's my opinion on all this. The Freedom Fund is trying to blame the judge for setting any bail at all. That's an argument for a different day. It's hard to believe they researched Adan's background at all. And if they did, it's incredible to me that they decided to help him. I think it's a noble idea to gather up money and get people out of jail who are being held after they're arrested for nonviolent crimes and simply don't have the money to get out. The unfairness of the system lets a rich person easily walk out the door when a poor person is stuck. But the actual process of doing that needs to be informed by some basic common sense. Here was a woman who was crying out for help, filing restraining orders, and you bailed him out, taking beatings, and you bailed him out, strangling the mother of his children, and you bailed him out, controlling her every moment, and you bailed him out, telling her he would kill her, and you bailed him out. It would be easy to say that the system failed Rachel Abraham, and it sounds to me like that's exactly what the Portland Freedom Fund is doing. But in this case, it seems the system was doing what it could to protect her, and it was the outsiders who failed Rachel Abraham. In my opinion, the Portland Freedom Fund was so concerned about Mohamed Adan that they forgot about Rachel Abraham, and it cost her her life. Now to tonight's big story. And I'll come over here to tell you about it. All this week on The Story, we're talking about the system designed to help people with some of the most serious mental health problems. Yesterday, we shared the first part of our series titled Uncommitted. Investigative reporter Evan Watson explained how a high bar in Oregon and Washington often prevents people from getting treatment when they refuse to do so voluntarily. Tonight, we're going inside the civil commitment process, hearing from people who've dealt with it firsthand, and we're getting an intimate look at when the system works and when it doesn't. Evan Watson joins us in the studio live now for part 2 of Uncommitted.
Thanks, Pat. When someone is showing significant signs of a mental illness, they can be very difficult to deal with because when it comes to it, placed on a temporary hold for evaluation at a hospital, even if doctors say mental health treatment, housing, and care are desperately needed, unless that person is an imminent danger to themselves or others, they're often released. Then many people struggle to get help on their own. When you're someone living this system or a worried family member, this process shows those frustrating gaps.
I thought he was just the typical obnoxious teenager. Eric was always very social. He was athletic. He had played high school basketball and good sense of humor. In his senior year of college at the University of Washington, we started to notice some changes.
Brenda Gardner remembers her son Eric telling her something was wrong. Eric was in his early 20s when he told his parents he needed brain surgery. Brenda and her husband brought Eric home from college to see a doctor. That's when they first experienced the terrifying symptoms of his mental illness.
Spittle coming out his mouth, in my face, screaming at me. His parting shot was, "And if you try to make me see a shrink, you'll never see me again." We had never seen anything like that before. And then that kind of behavior just continued, this really volatile, and then just not being in reality, that became much worse over time.
Eric threatened to kill his family members, expressing delusions, acting aggressively, and sending violent and disturbing text messages.
We put contraptions on each side of the door frame and ran a bar through it at night so that he had threatened to kill us. We were afraid he could just break down the door and come in and kill us at night.
After one outburst, police arrested Eric and ordered him not to contact his parents. But after 6 weeks of staying with family friends, Eric returned home.
We had no history of this in our family. It can happen to anyone, and it's not Eric's fault. What I say is, he's the victim. We're just collateral damage.
After a suicide scare, mental health evaluators placed Eric on a hospital hold, forcing him to get treatment. He took medicine, some of his symptoms stabilized, and he was released. But his psychosis later returned.
It just can't last, right? I mean, they can try really hard to hold it together, and maybe they go through a period where it works for a little while, but at some point it crumbles.
Eric is now living homeless in Seattle and still suffering from mental illness. After years of trying to find solutions, Brenda Gardner said she felt helpless. Eric turned down treatment, but he didn't meet requirements for forced mental health care, also known as civil commitment. The state can force someone to stay in a medical facility and receive treatment for up to 6 months, but only if they've proven to be dangerous to themselves or others.
I think that should be his right to refuse medication, but I think that he should be in supported housing, or if that was the only choice, I'd rather have him hospitalized than spending winters on the street.
Gardner says our mental health system's failure to get people like Eric the help they need is directly contributing to the homeless crisis. She says if a person doesn't choose housing for people with severe mental illness, which is already very limited with long wait lists, they're left to fend for themselves.
KGW reviewed Multnomah County data between 2013 and 2021. Of the thousands of people who showed mental illness symptoms dangerous enough to warrant a forced hold, less than 7% received a civil commitment ruling from a judge. Most people didn't make it that far.
Some of these people agreed to voluntary treatment, exiting the process. Many others, like Eric, were released because they didn't meet state standards, left to take care of themselves.
As far as I'm concerned, the homeless situation is an open-air psych ward. It's those people that should be in psychiatric facilities or in supported housing with a caseworker that checks on them, are instead living on the streets and being treated like animals.
But each person's experience with this process is different. Laureen remembers sitting in the back of a police car in Washington County, on the way to a hospital on a mental health hold.
I had some beliefs that weren't accurate and put myself in harm's way. I easily could have gone to jail for trespassing. I was making people afraid because I was not acting like the person that they knew. They're like, what is going on with her?
She knew people were concerned about her mental health.
Things weren't right, but nobody could figure it out.
Except this time she was forced to stay in a hospital as doctors evaluated her mental illness.
It was only when I couldn't leave that I was like, oh.
It's different this time.
Because I couldn't leave. I wanted to leave.
A doctor said Laureen's mental illness was a danger to herself, filing a notice of mental illness. Laureen was diagnosed with bipolar 1 and put on new medication. Then something changed. Laureen says she's fortunate. Her symptoms became more manageable. She started agreeing to treatment.
I just remember at a certain point, everybody kind of agreed, well, she's doing everything we're asking her to do, as opposed to if I had refused to participate in treatment, then it could have been different.
Laureen is an example of a voluntary diversion, when a person being held against their will agrees to a plan to treat their mental illness.
You'd say in your case, the system worked well.
Yes. I don't know if I would be alive, and it's hard to know what would have happened if somebody hadn't stepped in. I know my life would be a lot different.
Now she works as peer support for other people experiencing the civil commitment process, telling them she's been there, it'll be okay, even if she knows forced treatment doesn't always work out like it did for her.
But I do acknowledge that there are people that do slip through the cracks every single day, and that breaks my heart.
Evan's back with us now. And Evan, I'm so glad that we have that mix there, the kind of the hopeful part of people can get better with the right medication. But also, I feel so bad for Eric's mom. I know that there's a lot of families out there. How did you find her?
Yeah, actually, she reached out to us here at The Story. This was a month and a half ago or so, and I got in contact with her, and she was able to share that story of what they went through as a family, trying to get help or offering support for years. This was not just weeks or months, this was multiple years of this. And she reached out to us here at The Story, and we followed up with her. And part of that, too, leads into what we're talking about tomorrow right here on The Story as well, which is the gaps in this cycle, the data that I collected from public records requests that show how many people might experience a mental health hold, be released, and then experience another and another and another. And we'll dive into that tomorrow at 6.
Okay, super interesting. Thank you, Evan.
Thanks, Pat.
And we want you to know that we're reading your comments and working to answer your questions every day on this story. Tonight, we wanted to highlight an email we got from a woman named Sandy because she brings up some good points related to mental health services. She says, I was a student nurse back in 1968 and spent 3 months as a student at the State Mental Hospital in Salem. As I look back, those residents were well cared for. They had a warm place to sleep, clean clothes, and they had regular meals. Their medicine was given to them on a regular basis. They had regular sessions with group and staff. The system wasn't perfect, but the people were safe. Now there's no real help for people with mental illness. There's no place to go. A person in a mental crisis cannot make rational decisions. When we see someone abusing another, we have an obligation to report this and get the person help. Why do we not treat people with mental illness problems the same way? Sorry to go on and on and on. I just feel so helpless, and it feels so hopeless. Sandy, we hear you. That's why we're shining a light on mental health this week. Our series continues tomorrow and Thursday, and then we'll bring you a special Q&A segment with Evan on Friday to try and answer your questions so that we can try and find a way that we can all move forward. So what do you think about all this? What do you think needs to change about mental health treatment in the Pacific Northwest? Let us know right now by sending an email to thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail. Our phone number is 503-226-5090. Still ahead tonight on The Story, trying to escape the heat. It was the first day of school here in Portland and temperatures climbed into the mid-90s. What the school district is doing to keep your kids comfortable in the buildings that do not have AC. That's coming up next. Let's take a look outside now. This is our Rose City Sky Cam. You can see the Rose Garden and the Convention Center there in the distance. Temperatures soaring into the mid-90s again today. We'll send it over to Chief Meteorologist Matt Zaffino for a look at how long the heat's going to stick around. Matt?
Well, the good news, Pat, is that it won't be as hot tomorrow or the rest of the week or the weekend. But today we hit 100 again. That's our 5th time this year hitting 100. That ties for the most 100-degree days in Portland ever. And boy, I've got more numbers for you to just point out how hot this summer has been. So 100 degrees in Portland again. 5th time we've done that, and yes, it is a new record for the date. The old record, 98 back in 1987, okay? But this is also near a record number of 95-degree days. What is that record? Well, that record is 14 days back in 2005. Today was our 13th day of 95 or better. So we're close to that. We're in second place. So we're tied for first for 100-degree days. We're in second place for 95-degree days. The average number of those is only 4. We're up to 13. So that to me really points out how hot the summer's been. But let's take it. We take down another notch to 90-degree days. We're in third place for the greatest number of 90-degree days. Now, our warm summers, yes, they have been getting warmer. Since 1970, we are now averaging 19 days with above average temperatures, and that's through 2020 or 2021. So it keeps going up. The white line here is every single year. There's a lot of variability every year. Some years way below the number of days with above average temperatures. But for the most part, when you do the line of best fit, 19 days more. Hard to accomplish that without a climate change signal. It just is getting stronger and stronger as we go through time. Here are the 90-degree days by year. 24 in 2009, 29 in 2015. The record was 31 in 2018. So this year now is our 25th 90-degree day, so more than last year, and in third place just behind 2015, Pat. So they just keep coming. We've got more hot weather on the way, but it will be getting a little bit cooler. There's the 90-degree numbers, as we just talked about here, up to 25. Here's the forecast for you. It'll be a hot roll into September, but cooler. We'll still be in the 90s, but low 90s, and then we should manage to stay in the 80s for the weekend. So there's the good news.
Wow, that is good news. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Today marked the first day of school for students in the Portland Public School system, and a recent viewer email got us thinking about the heat and how the school systems are handling it. Wendy wrote to us to say, how come there's no program for Portland Public Schools getting AC during the hot months? Come on now. I like that. As we began looking into the issue, PPS blasted out an email to parents concerning the heat. They admit it is an issue, saying, we recognize the majority of our buildings are over 80 years old and do not have central air conditioning. We ask for your patience and understanding as our community continues to cope with the impacts of climate change and this week's predicted heat. So, what's being done about it? Basically, the hope is that it cools down enough overnight to get those buildings to a comfortable temperature. Here's the district's plan per their email to parents. Every night, each school's ventilation system will run from midnight to 6 a.m. to circulate as much cool air as possible. In the morning, custodial staff will open all operable windows where and when it's safe, and all HVAC and other portable cooling units will operate as programmed to, continuing circulating air in the classrooms. PPS also says there will be ample access to water, including water coolers being brought in to school if deemed necessary. And they're keeping a close eye on the forecast to potentially modify any school activities to limit the impacts of heat. So there's that. Still ahead tonight on The Story, Oregon has a new champion of sorts, an immunization champion. We're hearing from a Northeast Portland pharmacist who earned the distinguished title from the CDC. We'll explain the reason behind her new moniker after the break.
I am so happy that we have helped so much people.
A Northeast Portland pharmacist just got a prestigious award from the Center of Disease Control. Sandy Lee is Oregon's immunization champion. Her pharmacy has given out the most COVID-19 vaccinations in the entire state, which is quite a feat considering the pharmacy just opened last year. Brian Clerkley tells us how Sandy and her team got right to work.
The total that we've done so far, the whole team did is 45,000 vaccines.
Inside Lay Care Pharmacy in Northeast Portland, pharmacist Sandy Lee and her entire team are celebrating. They've given out more vaccinations than any other pharmacy in Oregon. The Centers for Disease Control, along with the Association of Immunization Managers, named Sandy as the state's immunization champion. After opening her pharmacy in the middle of the pandemic in 2021, Sandy says her team immediately got to work.
Sometimes it's hard to find a vaccine or make appointment online to go get the vaccine. So if we have the walk-in, people just come in, get the vaccine.
Sandy says walk-in clinics and different vaccination events across the city have helped get thousands of people vaccinated. Lay Care Pharmacy became a hub for vaccinations in the community, with a line usually forming down the street. When the clinic first opened, she had to coordinate with Multnomah County on how many doses they would get.
400 per week, 800 2 weeks. And then they gave us 800 doses, and we only finished that in 4 days.
Sandy and her entire team were resilient throughout the pandemic. As an immigrant from Vietnam, she's no stranger to challenging times.
I came as a refugee, so I live in Hawaii with my guardian. Finished my high school there, and my guardian, she passed away with cancer.
Then Sandy moved to Oregon to go to school at Oregon State University. Her husband, Tan, who's also a pharmacist, has been working with her throughout the pandemic. They say they're going to continue to go over and beyond for the community they love.
I am so happy that we have helped so much people and able to help too.
Bryant Clerkley, KGW News.
And Brian tells us the past 3 weeks, Sandy's pharmacy has been busy vaccinating children. Just last week, they vaccinated 140 kids. When we come back, how you can contribute tonight to the KGW School Supply Drive to help make sure kids have what they need to kick off the new school year. Our Hey Help campaign is the KGW School Supply Drive. We're trying to raise enough money and supplies for more than 15,000 kids. And one of the best and easiest ways you can help is to give online. You can do it right now. Grab your phone, aim your camera at the QR code there on your screen, then donate on our website. And if you don't have your phone right now, just remember kgw.com/school. Well, that's the end of our program. Thanks so much for being with us. And remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow.